to summarize, we can understand that our original ancestors were meant to grow to maturity. Does any existence start mature or perfect? No. You ever see a flower come out of the ground already blooming? Or a baby born walking and talking? No. There's time and necessity to develop. And physically, your physical body is going to grow automatically. You don't have to make effort. I want to grow my cells. But our consciousness, our character, does that automatically develop? No. We have to exercise our own responsibility and creativity to participate in our own spiritual development. That's the freedom and blessing of being a human being, to be conscious and self-aware and responsible. So if our original ancestors had grown to personal spiritual maturity, then we would have been able to master ourselves, our relationships, and the most powerful force in the universe, which is not violence and nuclear weapons, it's love. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. And were we spiritually mature, we would have been able to master that force, to master that power. But without reaching maturity, without becoming fruitful, you remember that metaphor? If you look at the biblical metaphor, God told them, don't eat the fruit. Was that a permanent? If you eat the fruit, you're going to be punished. You'll die. Do you think that that's the ideal relationship of a mature person to divinity? Fear of punishment? Following rules because of fear of punishment? No, that's how you deal with a child. Hey, don't run out in the street or you'll be punished. But when we mature, we understand and we are guided through love and trust and responsibility. So in a state of immaturity, human beings went in the wrong direction. That's the simple conclusion. Went outside of the principle, misdirected our love, misused our creativity, and failed to fulfill that original potential. Here's an interesting side note. Another person who studied the myths of the creation myths of the world's civilizations was psychologist Carl Jung. And Jung wrote an amazing book called Man and His Symbols, in which he analyzed the creation myths. And he too concluded every culture has a myth of our original alienation from our true purpose, our disconnection from our Creator, our fall. And he found that in all of those stories there are common symbols, trees and fruits and serpents and flying beings and other things that are common. And he found that many of the symbols that appear in these myths also recur in human dreams. And he found that people all over the world, even who haven't communicated with one another, have some awareness of these common symbols. And he called it man's collective unconscious. That we were connected on some unconscious spiritual level and had a common awareness and knowledge. And interestingly, Jung said that these symbols and the myths and the stories convey guilt about our sexuality. Interestingly, this can be seen in the story of Pandora. I mean, think about it, right? The gods betroth Pandora to a son of the gods. She's betrothed, promised. And she's told not to open the gift, the box they give her, until her wedding night. Now, gee, what do you think it is that a young woman is not supposed to open until her wedding night? Gee, what could that refer to, right? But she opens it prematurely and evil enters the world. Am I saying that sex is evil? No, not at all. It's the holiest, as I've told you. But immature, self-centered nature, when we're motivated by that, some of the most beautiful things can become damaging, hurtful, irresponsible, and abusive. Let's look at the story of Adam and Eve. Prior to the fall, according to the story, they are naked and they are not what? Ashamed. Not ashamed. Is there anything to be ashamed of? Their knees have any particular problem? Belly button is in trouble? No. Elbows? Nose? No. But all of a sudden, after they eat the fruit, they do become ashamed and they cover themselves. But strangely, they don't cover their mouths. that ate the fruit. They don't cover their hands that stole the fruit. They cover their sexual areas. Somehow they're guilty. And if you go into the scripture, what it means to know a woman, they ate of the tree of knowledge, or what it means to eat a fruit or pick a fruit, those are metaphors for sexual intimacy. And again, it's not sexuality that we're condemning. It's the immature, premature, self-centered nature of love that breaks down families, that exploits other people, that makes people want to be players. Right? After before they were naked and not ashamed, afterwards their guilt was centered on their sexual areas. Now, interestingly, this Genesis story is the root of the belief system of most of humanity. More than half the world's people consider themselves practicing believers of the three religions of the book: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And 3/4 of the world's people live in places where the culture comes from Christian or Jewish or Muslim tradition. 3/4 of the world's people. So this is a powerful idea. And the Genesis story is not just about disobedience. It's not just about eating a fruit and disobeying God and being condemned. If you look at that story, it describes how self-centered love broke down the first family. It's a story, it's history's first dysfunctional family right there, where husband and wife lost trust in one another, children felt alienated, and brother killed brother. There's a much deeper truth there. Not just the individual level of disobedience, but the breakdown of relationships because of self-centered love. That's the message there. The separation of man and woman from God, the alienation and distrust. The woman whom you gave me, she made me do it. Right? He blamed her. They resented and mistrusted each other. The war between the sexes began right there. And ultimately, the inability of parents to convey love and value to their children, leading one brother to resent and hate and covet what his younger brother had, and ultimately kill him. And at the heart of it is the exaltation of me before God and others. The disconnection from our Creator. So let's go back to the implication of the three blessings. Everybody with me so far? Yeah. The implication of the three blessings, they go in order. Be fruitful, and you don't multiply then be fruitful. Right? Trees have to mature and bear fruit, and the fruit has to be ripe or the seeds won't reproduce. So personal maturity precedes reproduction or sexual intimacy. Isn't that what parents teach their kids? Isn't that what parents all over the world try to help their kids understand? Haven't we seen all kinds of trouble and problem from premature, immature relationships? Yeah. So the first blessing, personal spiritual maturity, is the basis for intimacy and trust and sexuality and creating a harmonious family. That's the implication here. And a lot of social research can demonstrate that. This is one of America's foremost character educators, teaches at the State University of New York in Buffalo, Thomas Licona. From a study that he did, the effects of early sexual experience for teenagers. Number one, anxiety, fear. Of course, pregnancy or STDs, but also there's a certain angst, a certain dread inside when I'm going against my conscience or not feeling comfortable about what I'm doing. Also, regret. Do you know that even Teen Magazine did a survey, and that's Teen Magazine that says, be like Britney, you know that magazine? But even Teen Magazine found that 81% of young people who had sex before they were married regretted it. It didn't turn out at all what they were expecting. Or they got pregnant. Or they didn't experience the bliss and joy. Or the guy that they tried to prove they loved him by doing that dumped them the next. All kinds of reasons. Loss of self-respect. The number one correlation to early sexual experience is low self-esteem. Looking for love in, what do you call it? All the wrong places. Low self-esteem, disconnected family, single parent situation. And I'm not condemning people who are struggling in their life, but this is just an emotional reality. It makes us more vulnerable to look for love. Guilt. Corruption. And by corruption, I don't mean it makes us evil people. But the more we engage in that kind of immature, premature sexuality, the more we start looking at the opposite sex as a source of love, as someone to be used, as someone to be taken advantage of, as someone to get from. And so tell me if you think this statistic is true, if you think this is a true or false statement. The more partners, the more intimate relationships and the more sexual partners a young person has before they get married, the higher the percentage of divorce when they do get married. Yes or no? 100% true. Because you have so much to compare with. You have so many wounds. We try to shape ourselves like the first people. We are shaped by the early relationships that we have. That's also why sexual abuse and the large number of unreported cases of sexual abuse are so painful and damaging and difficult. And all of this is part of the result of our inability to grow to maturity before we took responsibility as parents. And anyone who's been involved in a relationship knows after that how easy is it to trust. How much harder is it to bond with another person? How much harder is it for you to open yourself? Shaken trust, anger, rage, hurt, depression, even suicide, ruined relationships and the stunting of our own emotional growth. Here's another survey that was done. This is the behavioral risks associated with early sexual experience. Now, all of these cases are for young men between 12 and 16, those who were not sexually active, those who were. Only the last one, attempted suicide, is for girls. So young men who were virgins, about 22% during that age period experiment with alcohol, about 18% cigarettes, about 6% of virginal young men between 12 and 16 try marijuana. 3% run away from home, 11% arrested by police, 7% suspended from school, and 3% of girls during this period who were virginal, who aren't sexually active, try to take their own life. Now compare that to those who are sexually active at such a young age. You've got 3 times the abuse of alcohol. You've got 3 times the abuse of cigarettes. You've got 6 times the abuse of marijuana. You've got 3 more times running away from home, 3 more times being arrested by police, 5 times more suspension from school, and 10 times more trying to take their life. Does that mean if you're sexually active, you're going to do those things? No. It means there's a correlation between the same factors that lead us to seek love in an immature, premature way, and that also create the basis for negative social behaviors and personal behaviors. So our second conclusion is that immature, fallen human beings, and by fallen, please don't, hearken back to traditional religious concepts. By fallen, what I mean is people with that contradiction, people with the contradiction within us, have not come to maturity, have not mastered ourselves. Immature, fallen human beings create false relationships and produce the evil world. Let's look at the result of that immaturity. Let's look where the conflict began. It began inside. I told you it starts in the individual, right? So when human beings lost God as the center, when man lost God as the center, when that relationship was cut, who became our center? Some religious people would say Satan became the center. Others would say self became the center. I'm telling you it's the same thing. Right? Because the tradition of selfishness, the first being in the universe that said, me first, I want what I want, screw everybody else, at the expense of God, at the expense of others, created that tradition of self-centeredness. So our separation from God is the basis of the conflict that began within us. Let's look at it. Okay? All of us have a mind and body. Anybody doesn't have a mind or body? No. We all do, right? Now, what is the body concerned with? What's the body's primary concern? It's yourself, right? What's your body telling you right now?
Lunch.
Is it lunchtime yet? I'm so hungry. God, it's hot in here. Who thinks it's hot in here? Who thinks it's cold in here? Okay, nobody. Who thinks that the seats, as comfortable as they've been, your butt is getting sore? You're getting tired of sitting down. Now your body's telling you this stuff constantly. It's sore. I'm here. I can't wait till we get out of here. I wish Shankar would shut up. Now, is that because your body's evil? No, that's because your body's focused on those things. There's nothing wrong with that. That's your physical body. But you also have a mind and a conscience. And hopefully your mind is being enlightened, inspired, given things to think about, is being impacted by the content. Is anybody having that experience?
Yes.
Oh, like 2 people, thank you. Now, your mind has a sensitivity to the bigger purpose, to the reason why you're here, to what you want to get done. Your mind also has a conscience to be sensitive to the needs of others, right? Now, which of those 2 is supposed to be the boss? The mind is the boss. They both affect each other, but one is supposed to be in charge. But here's the problem. When man lost God, the higher center, when we lost our connection to the ultimate reality and our awareness of our own insignificance as an individual on one level, to put it in other religious terms, then that our sense of, our connection to the higher center was diminished. When we became self-centered, our sensitivity to others, our connection to the bigger picture, our conscience became weak, and our concern for ourselves became predominant, because self-centered. And so this is the kind of person that gets married and spends $30,000 on the wedding and is all excited, and 6 months later is cheating on their spouse because they can't control themselves. Do you know that 75% of people who win $1 million or more in the lottery are broke in 5 years? That's people who win $200 million, they're broke in 5 years. Do you know that 80% of people who win $1 million or more in the lottery regret that they won? Because it leads to divorce and drug addiction and all kinds of difficult things. Because if a person doesn't have maturity and self-mastery, money's going to be trouble. Look at how many famous people are going through all kinds of difficulty. So how many of you would like to marry someone like this? Well, guess what? They don't want to either. So that led to the family level conflict, and we see that in the struggle between the man and woman in these early stories, and particularly in the Genesis story. And then we can see that the original love of God did not come through to the children because brother came against brother. And so my simple conclusion is that the roots of conflict and violence in the world start from the individual and throughout history have expanded to the family, to the tribe, to the nation, to the world. We had clan feuds, we had tribal difficulties, we had racial struggles, we had border wars, civil wars, and now it's an era of world war and global conflict. And the same selfish patterns have expanded from the family to the world. Our lack of self-control, dishonesty, promiscuity, violence, domestic violence and abuse, infidelity, divorce, family breakdown, racism, all of these things are coming from this simple root. Now, I love this point. I love this point. I think this is so profound. Many philosophers have struggled. How could evil come into how could a good God create something that could be evil? How could a being in the natural world become evil in some way? But you see, evil is not some foreign element. Good and evil are simply a matter of direction. You take the same human nature toward others, directed toward others, it's productive and beautiful. Directed towards self, the same creativity, the same desire, when it's self-centered, becomes destructive. That's all that good and evil is. Has the same starting point. Let me illustrate that to you. Originally, human beings share the desire to be free. Is that a good desire or a bad desire? It's good. We share also hope for our life and the desire to develop and accomplish and do good things and get and attain good things. Is that good or bad desire? It's a good desire. We share the capacity and desire for love. Is that good or bad? It's good. But you take the same nature, and when you center it on the self, when freedom becomes centered on the self, it becomes license. I want what I want at the expense of anyone else. I don't care how it impacts others. It's the same nature turned in the wrong direction. That is the problem of the world. Immature, self-centered people whose original nature has been distorted and misdirected. Hope and desire, when centered on the self, becomes greed. And love, when centered on the self, becomes lust and dominance and control and hurting other people and using them. So good and evil are simply a matter of direction. And the world that we're struggling in is simply a matter of immature people who've gone in the wrong direction. So if selfishness is the root, let's look at how that impacts the tree of our false nature. If selfishness is the root of this tree, then actually the principle goes deeply into some basic natures that arose as a result of selfishness. And I'm going to introduce them to you now. First of all, when we became those who look at the world from our own selfish viewpoint, centered on me, that's the basis of our ability to justify ourselves, to always find an excuse and blame others, and everybody does it. We twist our understanding of reality and our ability to rationalize our own actions, why we envy and are jealous of other people's blessings, and why we resent, comes from a self-centered viewpoint. Second is our tendency to be irresponsible, to fail to live up to the responsibility we were given in the beginning. That irresponsibility is the source of our inability to be faithful to partners, to be loyal to friends, or faithful to friends, to be loyal to those we're responsible to, and the reason why we lie. Is there anyone in this room who's never told a lie? If anybody says they are, I will call them a liar. Why do we lie? Why do we lie? We lie to avoid responsibility for what we've done. The easiest thing to do is to lie to your parents, to cover up your actions, to make an excuse. That doesn't make you a better person. It makes you a weaker person with less integrity. But that's the quickest action so that we don't have to take responsibility for the consequences. It comes out of irresponsibility. The third nature that arises from this selfish root is our tendency, out of our insecurity, to put ourselves above others, to think we're better than others. You know, actually the biggest bully is the biggest baby. The person who does the most bragging and boasting is the person who feels least good about themselves. It's rooted in our own insecurity. And out of that arrogance comes our tendency to put other people down and think we're better than them, and to find someone that we think is less than us because of their sex or their race or their religious belief, our tendency to judge, our false pride, all of these things. And the fourth of these natures that arise from our selfish root is the tendency of evil to multiply. You ever heard the saying that bad news travels fast? Yeah. Buddha said, it is easy to do what is evil, to do what is bad for oneself, but very difficult to do what is good for oneself. Jesus said, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And very few people find that gate. I'm sorry, most people. He said many people find that gate. But the gate is narrow and the way is difficult that leads to life, and few find it. So evil is much more easy to multiply than goodness. That's rumors and gossip and complaint and hysteria, mass hysteria and riots and negative things that multiply so easily. Even the economics and stock market and investing are so volatile based on human nature. People's fears. We succumb to peer pressure. We shift the blame by blaming other people. We spend a lot of time complaining. Complaining is not, when you go to the responsible person and say, hey, this is a problem, I'd like to fix it. That's not complaining. Complaining is when you want to find someone else to commiserate with. That boss is a piece of crap, right? I hate him. That Shanker said we'd finish by 1 o'clock, and it's... Right? So self-centeredness distorted human nature. It's the source of the contradiction. Our final point. Already, we're at the final point. But you've heard that before, right? Let's look at how that false nature impacted the world. We know that originally, we didn't see such God-centered mature men and women, such God-centered families. Instead, because of self-centered individuals, then relationships Self-centered and immature individuals made false and self-centered relationships that were dysfunctional. And that's the root of this world and of our history. Instead of a God-centered world of mature men and women as the basis for a good and godly society, nation, and world, we have self-centered, immature, fallen individuals, dysfunctional families, and misdirection, a distorted society, divided nations, and an unjust and unequal and painful world where many suffer. A corrupted world. And we can see that immorality, sexual immorality, and irresponsibility has brought down presidents and kings and religious leaders, distorted families, caused the suffering of children, and broken entire civilizations down. The great British historian Toynbee pointed out that civilizations don't fall because of enemies that attack them from outside. Civilizations decline because of corruption within. Immorality. That's what happened to Rome. That's what's happened to civilization after civilization. There have been whole studies conducted, Family and History by Carl Zimmerman at Harvard University. Sex and Culture by, what's his name? J.D. Unwin at Cambridge University, that have traced the decline of civilizations because of immorality. So this world of inhumanity and immorality is the result of immature, self-centered individuals. The entire purpose of history, the basis for religion, God's desire and goal behind everything, and that's what I'm going to address this afternoon, okay? That's what we're going to take up this afternoon. The contention that history is not random chance collection of individual actions, that there's a purpose and a meaning and a direction to history. And that the ultimate direction is to restore the world that was intended, the original world that was intended from the beginning. A good and God-centered world. And we're going to look at history and human events as a process of restoration. That political and economic and social and scientific and cultural events are all expressions of this drive of the human original mind to get back home, to get back to where we're meant to be, and also the desire of the parent to find his lost children, to bring us back, to raise us up again. And we're going to look at all of history from that standpoint. Just a brief introduction this afternoon in 2 presentations. Now in this part of the principle, we're done already. I didn't lie this time. We're finished. But some topics that I didn't cover, that when we go deeper into the principle of the fall, does Satan exist? Is there an enemy? Where did evil begin from? And would the individual that said me first, would that qualify as somebody that's an enemy? Because the word Satan means enemy. What is original sin? What is sin after all? And how does that relate to between Eastern and Western religious concepts? What actually took place with the human fall? What was the motive and what was the process? What's the relationship between the power of love, the strongest force in the universe, and our own conscience and ability for self-control? A lot of people lose that battle. The conscience loses the battle when we desire love. Did you notice? So how can that be resolved? And what's the relationship between human freedom and the fall? There's other elements as well, but these are some of the additional topics. As we break for lunch, I want to leave you with these 2 questions. And I would love it if you have a chance to reflect on them and maybe share them with others over lunch. What suggests to you that human beings have a contradiction, as I've suggested, and are not spiritually mature? Can you find evidence of that? Does that make sense to you? Does that seem logical? What can you see in the world, in yourself, in your own experience, in your marriage or previous marriages, or the struggles you've had in life, or the mistakes of members in your family, or what does that suggest? What in your life experience suggests that this is true? And what do you think are the worst problems in the world today? And what do you now understand about why they exist? Right? Can I leave you with those 2 questions? Do you have any questions for me? Now's your chance. It's 1 minute after 1. I apologize for the 1 minute. I apologize for the 1 minute. Okay.